Part 5 of Community. Introduction. Community is an organized ecological unit in which organisms interact through various associations such as predation, competition, mutualism, and parasitism, linked to each other via feeding relationships and are adapted to prevailing physical and environmental surroundings. These interactions, associations, and adaptations by the organisms provide community its distinct structure and influence other characteristics such as growth and developments of the community, dominance and species diversity. Dominance and species diversity. Structure of the community. The basic structure of the community is divided into physical and biological structure. The physical structure of community is defined by the growth forms and life forms. Physical structure, growth forms and life forms. The structure and form of vegetation defines the differences between different terrestrial communities. On the basis of growth forms, the vegetation of the community can be classified. Plant community may exhibit different growth forms such as short or tall plants, woody or herbaceous plants, or deciduous or evergreen plants. The herbs, shrubs, and trees are further subdivided these categories into evergreen, sclerophytes, needle-leafed evergreens, thorn trees, broad-leafed evergreen or broad-leafed deciduous trees, dwarf shrubs, grasses, ferns, mosses, lichens, and forbs. The plants are also classified on the basis of life forms by Christian Ronkier in 1903. He is a Danish botanist who defined life forms on the basis of originating tissue above ground or simply height of the plant. He suggested that in a given area, all the species are grouped into 6 principal classes of life forms, namely epiphytes, phanerophytes, chamephytes, hemicryptophytes, cryptophytes, and therophytes. Epiphytes, phanerophytes, chamephytes, cryptophytes, hemicryptophytes, and therophytes. A community consists mostly of phanerophytes are characterized by warm climate, whereas when mostly comprised of hemicryptophytes and chamephytes are characterized by cold climate. Stratification. The ecological communities are arranged in different layers or strata forms a phenomenon called stratification. For example, in the natural forest community, as per the height of the plants, the community is arranged into number of strata or layers such as herbaceous layer consisting of herbaceous plants followed by shrubs, smaller trees and tall trees. This fractionation in the community is caused by the gradations in the external environmental factors like water levels, temperature and light. Different strata or layer of forest community receives different degree of light intensity, providing vertical stratification to the community structure. In a forest community, generally 3 or more vertical layers of strata or plants are found, including a herb layer, shrub, small tree layer followed by a canopy tree layer. The canopy tree or other taller trees produces more foliage and interrupt the light to reach smaller plants on the ground. The gradients in the physical environment of the community causes horizontal layering or patterns among species. Differences in the amount of factors such as nutrients and water can significantly alter the distribution of plant and animal species over a region. A community consists of different growth forms determining the community structure such as herbs, shrubs, trees. A growth form also has variations such as a tree can be long-leaved or broad-leaved. Various growth forms have different mode of arrangement, classifying community into horizontal zonation and vertical stratification. Populations assembled to form communities, and these populations are dispersed into definite vertical or horizontal strata. Horizontal zonation. The spatial arrangement of community species exhibit patterns, and based on these patterns, the community is divided into sub-communities which are ecologically related. If the distribution pattern is horizontal, it's called horizontal stratification or zonation layering. zonation layering in community. For example, in lakes or deep ponds, majorly three zones are recognized, like littoral, limnetic, photic or open water, and profundal zone, a photic or deep water zone. The organism varies in each zone of zonation pattern. Another example include mountain associated vegetation, altitudinal and latitudinal variations of vegetation in relation to climate of the existing region. So here we can see littoral zone. In case of ocean, similarly, this littoral zone, there exists a zone called neritic zone. So here we can see littoral zone is there, open water zone is there. That means photic zone, top layer. Deep water zone, a photic zone. Profundal zone is also there, called a photic. Profundal or limnetic. Photic or open water or limnetic, and profundal zone, a photic or deep water. Vertical stratification. Vertical change in the pattern of community structure is called stratification. If it's zonation, it's horizontal. Don't get confused with these two terms. If it's zonation, it's always horizontal. If it's stratification, it's vertical. Vertical. Okay. Vertical changes in the pattern of community structure is called stratification. Vertical stratification is as simple as the horizontal zonation community of pond, where each zone has different vertical story or complex stratification. For example, in grassland communities, distinct floor with different yet characteristic growth forms are exhibited. The lowest vertical subdivision is called subterranean, that means beneath the soil. Subterranean, which include roots of plants, debris, and living organisms like soil bacterium, protozoans, and fungi. Then next is the herbaceous substratum. Above the soil with roots of growth forms, the herbaceous substratum include upper parts of growth forms. The forest community stratification is much more complex with 5 vertical layering, including the vertical stratification in the forest community, mostly comprised of following strata: subterranean, forest floor with the upper part of growth form along with the litters, fungi, bacteria, etc. Herbaceous vegetation, shrubs, and forest strata, which is represented with a term called canopy. An additional stratum called emergent trees, which are present in the tropical rainforest, and these plants raises above the canopy of the forest. Here we can see subterranean strata, forest floor, herbaceous vegetation, shrubs, forest strata, and above that we can see emergent trees in case of tropical rainforest. Okay, vertical stratification in a forest community. Forest animals lives in different substrata, and many of them may shift between substratums. The properties, requirement, and adjustments of one strata can be similar to the same stratum of different communities somewhere else in the world. For example, forest floor of one community in country 1 share common requirements and adjustments to the community in country 2, although these countries are geographically separated. The animals living in such geographically separated but similar substratum are called ecological equivalent. Ecological equivalent. Ecological equivalent. Biological structure and characteristics of a community. A community has the following characteristics like structure. By virtue of understanding the structure of a community, the frequency, density, and abundance of different types of species are measured. Then dominance. The community type is determined by the dominant species. These species of one or more type either occupy large space or occur in large number and called as dominant species. Then diversity. The community show diversity, which is composed of different species of plants and animals in different groups that may belong to different growth forms of or life forms and are essentially prevailing in uniform environmental conditions or surroundings. Diverse communities are healthy and stable communities. Periodicity. The dominant species of the community are studied in various seasons of the year to determine various life processes such as reproduction, growth, and respiration. So, periodicity is defined as the expression and reoccurrence of various life processes annually at different intervals in nature. Then stratification within ecological communities. The habitat arrangement in form of layering, either vertical or horizontal, is called stratification. So I mentioned only the vertical stratification is called stratification, but it's not like that. It's my mistake, I guess. Zonation, preferably you can say horizontal. Stratification, vertical, but still both are stratification. Horizontal or vertical, that doesn't matter. It's called stratification. The stratification of two different types of communities may differ, such as the lake community represent horizontal stratification, whereas mountain plant communities obey vertical stratification. Ecotone and edge effect. Ecotones are easily recognizable marginal zones of vegetation separating two distinct types of communities. The species diversity is greater in the ecotone in comparison to the adjacent communities. This phenomenon of greater intensity and diversity at the common junction is called edge effect. Ecological niche. Ecological niche is defined as the role or function of species it plays in its ecosystem. In the ecological complex, different plants and animals of different species differ in their function, and their combined interactions with other species in its environment are called its ecological niche. In other words, it can also be defined as the small habitat of single species within a large habitat in which it survives. Epiodem defines wait a minute, it's kind of confusing for me. Ecological niche. Ecological niche is defined as the role or function of species it plays in its ecosystem. In the ecological complex, different plants and animals of different species differ in their function, and their combined interactions with other species in its environment are called its ecological niche. In other words, it can also be defined as the small habitat of single species within a large habitat in which it survives. E.P. Odom defines and differentiates ecological niche and habitat by saying that ecological niche is the profession of the species within the ecosystem where the habitat is its address. Apiodon defines and differentiates ecological niche and habitat by saying that ecological niche is the profession of the species within the ecosystem, whereas the habitat is its address. Community productivity. Community productivity is defined as the net storage of energy and production of biomass per unit time by the community. Biotic stability. Biotic stability is the ability of a community to regain its equilibrium followed by disturbances causing population fluctuations. The stability of the community is directly dependent on the diversity of the community. In 1992, Krebs characterized communities into 5 characteristics that can be studied, namely growth forms and life forms. Species richness, dominance, relative abundance, and trophic structure. Other major types of factors that constitute the structure of the community are as follows. Species richness. Species richness is given as number of species in a community. In an ecological habitat, landscape or community, in the ecological habitat, landscape or community of the count of different species represents species richness. It does not indicate about the species abundance or relative abundance of species. For example, beetles counted from a pitfall trap. For example, we can say beetles counted from a pitfall trap. Sample heterogeneity and the number of species influence the species richness. If the samples are collected from different environment and habitats, then the collected data is higher for species richness. Thus, sampling should be performed on large areas as the more heterogeneous environment prevails and large size of population. Species richness helps in assessing the conservation values of landscape or habitat by relative comparisons. Although it does not consider the type of species, but areas with rare species have higher conservation values than some number of species which are commonly found. Then species, wait a minute, what was that? Although it does not consider the type of species, but areas with rare species have higher conservation values than some number of species, than same number of species which are commonly found. Yeah, that's obvious. Species diversity. The major biodiversity measurements are species richness, Shannon-Weaver index, and Simpson's diversity index. Species diversity comparisons of two-factor species evenness and species richness, number of species. Species evenness indicate the relative abundance of each species. Community 1 and Community 2, species richness and diversity in community. Both communities have three types of plant species depicting same species richness, but relative abundance vary. In community 1, species A, B, and C are equal in proportion, 3 each, indicating higher species evenness. This revealed higher species diversity. In community 2, species C is more in proportion, indicating low species evenness and species diversity. So species evenness kind of sort of contributes to a great amount of species diversity. Diversity indices. In a given community, the species diversity can be measured mathematically by the diversity index. The measurement of diversity index is dependent on the species abundance and species richness. The species abundance is given as the number of organisms per species, and the species richness is given as the number of species in the community. Information statistic indicates that indices and dominance indices are the two types of diversity indices given as Shannon index and Simpson diversity index respectively. The equation for the two indices are given below. Shannon-Weaver index. It is a common index of species diversity represented as h nu is equal to minus summation pi log pi, where n total number of individuals found. In total number of individuals found, there is mistake or something. Where n is the total number of individuals found is equal to, I don't know what it is, but n is equal to total number of individuals found, but there is no n. Small n individuals of, I guess, now check this once. N individuals of one particular species found, p is equal to n by n. Oh, n, capital N and small n, we don't know. We don't know in this case, like only p is shown. That p is found with the help of small n and capital N, and in that case, capital N is the total number of individuals found. Small n individuals of one particular species found. P is equal to small n by n, total number of individuals found. Proportion, sum of the calculations. H nu is the diversity index. The proportion of ith species is represented as pi, while S is the species richness, number of species in community. So diversity index is equal to summation of pi. Pi means n by n log n by n. Yeah, n is equal to total number of, h nu is equal to summation pi log pi. log E, PI. Okay, where n is total number of individuals found, n individuals of one particular species found, p is equal to small n by capital N, proportions, then proportion, summation, sum of the calculations, h nu is the diversity index, and proportion of ith species is represented as pi, while s is the species richness. Species richness. S is also needed. Okay, number of species in community. Pi log Pi. This is about Shannon-Weaver index. Yeah, linear. And then Simpson index. DS. DS is equal to S summation I is equal to 1 in I into Ni minus 1 by N into N minus 1. N into N minus 1 by N into N minus 1, where N is the total number of individuals in ith species, N is equal to individuals of one particular ith species, P is equal to N by N, proportion, summation of the calculations. The Shannon index is based on the assumptions that samples are randomly collected and species are represented in that randomly collected sample. It is an information statistic index. The Simpson index is majorly depend on the dominant or common species, and thus it is a dominance index. Don't forget, this can be asked as a question. Shannon index is based on random sample selection and it's a statistic index. Simpson index is a dominance index. In this type of index, rare species in less number with only few representatives do not produce any significant difference in the measurement of diversity. In 1948, Edward S. Simpson introduced a Simpson index, which measures the extent of concentration when organisms are classified. In 1950, Oris C. Herfindahl rediscovered the same index. In 1945, Albert O. Hirschman already introduced the square root of the index. Therefore, the Simpson index in ecology is also called as Herfindahl-Hirschman index, HHI, or Herfindahl index. Herfindahl-Hirschman index, HHI, or Herfindahl index in economics. Then Gini-Simpson index, or Gini-Simpson index, I don't know how to pronounce this. In contrast to the probabilities of same type of entities taken at random in the original Simpson index, the Gini-Simpson index 1 minus lambda represents its transformation that equals the probability of two entities corresponding to different types. In ecology, it is also called as pi, or probability pi, or probability of interspecific encounter. It can be expressed in the following equation. 1 by lambda is equal to, lambda is nothing else, Simpson index, I guess, yeah. Simpson index is lambda. So pi is equal to pi, probability of interspecific encounter. 1 minus lambda is equal to r I is equal to 1, pi square is equal to 1 minus 1 by d square. Dominance. In a community, different species interacts among themselves, and in some communities, the interaction results in a dominance by one species or by a prominent species in group. The organisms dominating others are referred to as dominants. In ecology, the proportion of biomass or abundance of one species or taxon than other interacting species or taxon in a community, it is the dominant species that defines the ecological community. For example, Ulmus glutinosa alder is the tree dominating in the Western Europe woodland areas. They are used to classify or identify the type of ecology. In a community, we can consider a community as dominant on the basis of following. Either they are occupying maximum space of community habitat or have highest biomass or play critical role in nutrient cycling, contribute maximum to energy flow or regulate other community organisms. Sometimes numerically abundant means more in number, makes organisms superior and dominant, but not necessarily always. Microclimate within the community also affect and complicate the system by contributing more dominant species per microclimate. Microclimates have local environmental differences like nutrient levels, moisture, topographic locations, etc. It's only how impactful and important functions a species play in shaping the structure and function of community which decides its dominance. Sometimes even the low density group of species or a single species can be dominant. And keystone species, dominant species, plants or animals playing crucial and unique role and highly affect community structure and function in relation to its abundance are called keystone species. These keystone species have very intense inter-species associations, thus controls the number and type of other species in community. Therefore, if we remove keystone species, the community will shift to new form dramatically and vary from its original structure and function. A classic example of keystone species is Piasta ocaraceus, a starfish. The starfish is a keystone predator and the only natural predator for mussels, sea urchins, and many other shellfishes. So, if we remove starfish, the mussels or urchin population will proliferate in an uncontrolled manner, shifting the community. Another example includes a prey predator system where small predators like weevil, E. leconte, which forage on herbaceous species called E. watermifoil. E. watermifoil can eliminate dominant plant species of the inhabited community, but it's the predator E. leconte which control E. watermifoil from doing so by feeding on it. Watermifoil prey number is less and thus require low density of predator. But if predator is eliminated out of the community, the prey will outgrow in number dramatically, thereby vanishing the dominant species of community, and thus by eliminating the small number predator, the community character will now be altered without its actual dominant species. This example indicates that dominant species directly control the community but keystone species indirectly alter the community character. Several approaches are used to determine the ecological dominance. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individuals of the species found in large number represent the abundance of species, and its distribution within the ecosystem is called as relative species abundances. Relative abundance, when the total abundance of all organisms is compared to numerically abundant one species, it is called as species relative abundance. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individuals of a species found in large number represents the abundance of species, and its distribution within ecosystem is called as relative species abundances. Then relative dominance. Dominance among same-sized species can be measured by relative abundance, and the total abundance of all organisms is compared to numerically abundant one species. It is called as species relative abundance. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individuals of a species found in large number represent the abundance of species, and its distribution within ecosystem is called as a relative species abundance. Then what is relative dominance? Dominance among same-sized species can be measured by occupying by a species to the entire area of community. Relative frequency. Among different sized species, the dominance is measured by the relative frequency. All these three measurements are summed up to provide an important value to each species. These values of species ranked them in a list, and index species are the species with high levels of important value. Then sporadically or locally abundant. The frequency of species occurrence in all samples is termed as incidence, which relate to abundance. If the incidence or frequency is low, but the abundance of species in a sample is high, it is called sporadically abundant. How to measure and calculate relative species abundance? There are several kinds of sampling methods such as track count, spotlight count, monitoring point pressure, roadkill counts, and plant cover for plant species, etc. The relative abundance of the community is calculated as relative abundance of species, number of species from one sampling, total number of species of all sampling. And ecotone, the two integrating community meets at a transitional area called ecotone. The transition area between ecosystems like grassland and forest forms a regional ecotone, and between forest and field forms a local ecotone which can be wider and narrow. Regional ecotone and local ecotone. This ecotone may appear as clear boundaries with homogeneous surfaces or in gradual blending forms between two communities. Then formation of ecotone when physical environment changes. Example from forest to clean land, a clear and sharp interface is created between two communities. Moreover, gradual blended interface forms when unique local species and species common to both interacting community found together, for example in mountain ranges. Most wetlands are ecotones like woodlands of Western Europe. Type of ecotone: halocline, gradient salinity; thermocline, gradient in temperature; pycnocline, water density gradient. Types of ecotone: halocline, gradient salinity; thermocline, gradient in temperature; pycnocline, water. Water density gradient. Chemocline, chemical gradient, water. Different forms of ecotones. You can see features. We are going to learn about ecotones in halocline, thermocline, pycnocline, chemocline. A sharp vegetation transition, for example change in grass color, indicate an ecotone. Then physiognomy, a key indicator of ecotone where the plant species differ in physical appearance. If the grass color changes drastically at a point, we can identify it's a ecotone. Changes in species is indicators of ecotone where we observe some specific organisms at one side of the ecotone boundary while some other specific organisms on the other side. Spatial mass effect. New plant establishment or migration obscure an ecotone as they cannot form self-sustaining population in different ecotone. But if survives between two communities, then species richness is exhibited by the ecotone. An ecotone can reveal the space sharing efficiency of two communities and the types of biomes by observing the exotic species abundance in ecotone. Best model to study diverse ecosystem. Shift in dominance represented by ecotone. Ecotone act as an ecological niche for the species colonizing at the junction called edge effect. Ecoclines, a physical transition zone between biological systems termed as ecocline, relates to ecotone. It depicts the physiochemical environmental changes microclimatically or chemically, signaling an ecotone via signals such as gradient of hydrothermal salinity or pH respectively. Chemically signaling an ecotone via signals such as gradient of hydrothermal salinity or pH respectively. Edge effect. In ecology, ecotone exhibit changes in population constituting community structure allowing for greater biodiversity at the boundaries of the merged habitat, and this is called as edge effect. When two habitats are separated by wise edge effects called ecotone, Then they develop their own type of vegetation and environmental conditions. Types of edge effect: narrow edge effect, abrupt ending of one habitat from where another habitat begins, is a narrow edge effect. Wide edge effect, significant distances between two habitats is exhibited as wide edge effect. Induced edge effect, the structural changes are induced over time either by the human interferences or natural disturbances like fire and leads to induced edge effect. Then comes inherent edge effect. The border between two habitats are separated and stabilized by natural features are called as inherent edge effect. Perforated edge effect. Perforated edge effect. The distance between two habitats has gaps in them which help in assisting other habitats. Then convoluted edge effect. Convoluted edge effect. A nonlinear division of two habitats lead to convoluted edge effect. Edge effects in succession. When vegetation spreads, the succession is affected by edge effects. Different species colonize to different central portions or to the edge, leading to differential species distribution. With a change in orientation, the edge also changes, thus participating in different vegetation patterns. Other structural factors may include seasonal and diurnal fluctuations, some space and time, the population fluctuations in the communities, pattern diversity. Community is organized on the basis of pattern diversity. The patterns can be horizontal, segregation, or vertical, stratification, etc. Now let's have a summary. The interactions, associations, and adaptations by the organisms provide community its distinct structure and influence other characteristics such as growth and developments of the community, dominance, and species diversity. The basic structure of the community is divided into physical and biological structure. The physical structure of community is defined by the growth forms and life forms. On the basis of the growth forms, the vegetation of the community can be classified. Plant community may exhibit different growth forms such as short or tall plants, woody or herbaceous plants, or deciduous or evergreen plants. The plants are also classified on the basis of life forms, classified on the basis of perinating tissue, above ground, or simply height of the plant. All these species are grouped into 6 principal classes of life forms, namely epiphytes, phanerophytes, chamophytes, hemicryptophytes, cryptophytes, and thermophytes. Therophytes. The ecological communities are arranged in different layers or strata forms a phenomenon called stratification. This fractionation in the community is caused by the gradations in the external environmental factors like water levels, temperature, and light. Different strata or layer of forest community receives different degree of light intensity, providing vertical stratification to the community structure. The gradients in the physical environment of the community cause horizontal layering or patterns among species. Differences in the amount of factors such as nutrients and water can significantly alter the distribution of plant and animal species over a region. Various growth forms have different mode of arrangement, classifying community into vertical stratification and horizontal zonation. Populations assembled to form communities, and these populations are dispersed into definite vertical or horizontal strata. If the distribution pattern is horizontal, it's called a zonation layering in community. For example, in lakes or deep ponds, majorly 3 zones are recognized: littoral, limnitic, photic or open water, and profondal zone or aphotic or deep water. Vertical stratification is a sample as zonation, horizontal zonation, where each zone has different vertical story or complex stratification. The forest community stratification is much more complex with 5 vertical layering, including the vertical stratification in the forest community, mostly comprised of following strata like subterranean forest floor with the upper parts of growth form along with the layers, litters, fungi, bacteria, etc. Herbaceous vegetation, shrubs, and forest strata or canopy. The biological structure of the community is characterized by the factors such as species richness, dominance, relative abundance, ecotone, and edge effect. Species richness is given as number of species in a community, sample heterogeneity, and the number of species influence the species richness. Species diversity comprised of 2 factors: species evenness and species richness, number of species. Species evenness indicates the relative abundance of each species. In a community, different species interacts among themselves and in some communities, the interaction results into dominance by one species or by a prominent species in groups. The organisms dominating others are referred to as dominants. Dominant species playing crucial and unique role and highly affect community structure and function in relative to this abundance are called keystone species. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individual of a species found in large number represent the abundance of species, and its distribution within ecosystem is called as relative species abundance. Here, the two integrating community meets at a transitional area called ecotone. This ecotone may appear as clear boundaries with homologous surfaces or in gradual blending forms between two communities. In ecology, ecotone exhibit changes in population constituting community structure, allowing for greater biodiversity at the boundaries of the merged habitats, and this is called edge effects. So that's it. Thank you for listening.